The iron tang of blood filled the air as Olivia Hartwell pressed herself against the velvet seat cushions, her fingers gripping the edge of the stagecoach window frame while the vehicle lurched violently over the rutted trail through the Dakota Territory Badlands in the summer of 1879. She had been traveling for 3 days from St. Louis, heading toward Bismarck, where her uncle had promised her work in his mercantile store, and now she wondered if she would ever arrive at all. The 4 masked riders had appeared from behind a cluster of wind-carved rock formations an hour past noon, their revolvers gleaming in the merciless sun, and the driver had barely managed to shout a warning before the first shots rang out across the desolate landscape. The coach driver slumped forward in his seat, crimson spreading across his shirt, and the reins slipped from his hands as the horses panicked and bolted forward. Olivia screamed as the stagecoach careened wildly, tipping onto 2 wheels before crashing back down with bone-jarring force. The elderly woman sitting across from her, Mrs. Patterson, clutched her carpetbag and began to pray in a trembling voice. Beside Olivia, a traveling salesman named Mr. Godfrey fumbled with a small pistol, his hands shaking so badly he nearly dropped it. "Get down!" he shouted, but there was nowhere to go in the confined space. The raiders closed in, their horses' hooves thundering against the packed earth. One of them fired a shot that splintered the wood near Olivia's head, and she ducked instinctively, her heart hammering against her ribs. Through the window, she caught glimpses of their faces beneath the bandanas, eyes hard and pitiless. These were not men who showed mercy. The stagecoach suddenly veered off the trail completely, bouncing over rocks and scrub brush as the terrified horses ran blind. Mr. Godfrey was thrown against the door, which burst open, and he tumbled out with a strangled cry. Mrs. Patterson's prayers grew louder, more desperate. Olivia tried to brace herself, but another violent lurch sent her crashing into the opposite wall. Pain exploded through her shoulder. Then came the sound that would haunt her nightmares for years to come, the whoosh of igniting kerosene. One of the raiders had thrown something, a bottle wrapped in cloth, and it shattered against the side of the coach. Flames erupted instantly, spreading across the dry wood with terrifying speed. The fire caught the wind, fed by the coach's momentum, and within seconds the interior filled with acrid smoke. "Jump!" Mrs. Patterson shrieked, but the door on her side was blocked by flames. Olivia's eyes burned and watered. She could barely see through the thick smoke. Heat pressed against her skin, growing more intense by the second. The horses finally collapsed in their traces, exhausted and panicked, and the stagecoach ground to a halt. The sudden stop threw Olivia forward again. Her dress caught on something, trapping her as the flames climbed higher, reaching for her with hungry tongues of orange and red. Terror unlike anything she had ever known seized her throat. She pulled frantically at her skirts, but they would not come free. The fabric began to smoke. Mrs. Patterson had somehow managed to crawl out through the driver's seat opening, but Olivia was stuck, and the fire was everywhere now, consuming the luggage, the seats, the walls. She screamed for help, knowing the raiders would not save her, knowing she was going to die here in this burning coffin on the Dakota plains. Through the roar of the flames and her own panicked breathing, she heard something else. Hoofbeats, different from before, heavier. A man's voice, deep and commanding, cut through the chaos. "Hold on!" Strong hands reached through the flames, impossibly strong, and grabbed her arms. The grip was like iron. With a tremendous wrench, whoever it was tore her free from whatever held her trapped, fabric ripping, and hauled her bodily out of the inferno. She felt herself lifted, felt the blessed relief of cooler air on her face, even as smoke filled her lungs and made her cough violently. The stranger carried her away from the burning wreckage, his long strides eating up the ground, and did not stop until they were a safe distance away. He set her down on a patch of grass near a cluster of rocks, but he did not let go. His arms remained wrapped around her, holding her tight against a chest that felt as solid as the mountain stone. Olivia coughed and gasped, her whole body shaking, and those powerful arms only tightened, as if he could somehow shield her from the horror they had just escaped. "You are safe now," he said, his voice a low rumble against her ear. "Breathe. Just breathe." She tried, drew in one shuddering breath, then another. Her lungs ached, her eyes still streamed tears from the smoke. But she was alive, impossibly alive, and this stranger was holding her like she was something precious that might shatter if he let go. When her vision finally cleared enough to see, Olivia pulled back just slightly and looked up at the man who had saved her. her breath caught for an entirely different reason. He was enormous, easily over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they blocked out the sun. His arms, still loosely circling her, were thick with muscle, the kind that came from years of hard physical labor in unforgiving country. He wore buckskin clothing, fringed and well-worn, and his hair fell past his shoulders in waves of dark brown, shot through with hints of copper where the light caught it. A thick beard covered his jaw, neatly trimmed, and his face was weathered and sun-bronzed. But it was his eyes that held her frozen. They were a startling shade of gray-blue, like winter ice on a clear day, and they looked at her with an intensity that made her feel seen in a way she had never experienced before. "Are you hurt?" he asked, those piercing eyes scanning her face, her arms checking for injuries with the focus of someone who knew what to look for. I do not think so," Olivia managed, though her voice came out hoarse and broken. "My shoulder. When we crashed, but nothing serious." His jaw tightened. "The others?" She looked past him to where the stagecoach still burned, flames reaching toward the sky, black smoke billowing. Mrs. Patterson sat on the ground nearby, rocking back and forth, alive but clearly in shock. Of Mr. Godfrey, there was no sign. The driver was certainly dead. "There was a man," she whispered. "He fell out. I do not know if—" "Stay here," the mountain man commanded, and the authority in his voice was absolute. He stood with fluid grace despite his size, and Olivia watched as he moved toward where Mr. Godfrey had fallen. He found the salesman lying face down in the dirt, unconscious but breathing. The stranger checked him over with quick, practiced movements, then lifted him as easily as if he weighed nothing and carried him to where Mrs. Patterson sat. "Watch him," he told the older woman, and she nodded mutely. Then he turned his attention to the burning stagecoach, his expression hardening. "The raiders, did you see which way they went?" Olivia tried to think past the ringing in her ears, the shock that was starting to set in. After they threw the fire, I think they rode north. I heard them laughing." The muscle in his jaw jumped, a flash of pure fury crossing his features before he controlled it. "They will answer for this," he said quietly, and something in his tone made Olivia believe him absolutely. He returned to her, crouching down so he was at eye level. "What is your name?" "Olivia," she said. "Olivia Hartwell." "Yates Morrison," he said. "I have a camp about 2 miles from here, up in the hills. Can you ride?" She nodded, though truthfully she had never been on a horse without a saddle, and riding behind someone as intimidating as Yates Morrison seemed like it might present its own challenges. But what choice did they have? The stagecoach was destroyed, the driver dead, and they were stranded in the middle of nowhere with raiders potentially still in the area. Yates stood and offered her his hand. When she took it, his palm engulfed hers, rough and calloused, but surprisingly gentle as he helped her to her feet. Her legs wobbled slightly, and immediately his other hand came to her waist, steadying her. "Take a moment," he said, his voice softer now. "The shock will pass." But Olivia shook her head. "We need to move. Those men might come back." Something that might have been approval flickered in his eyes. "True enough. But they will not catch us unprepared." He had a massive bay gelding tethered to a scrubby tree, a horse that matched its owner in sheer size and presence. Yates untied the animal and led it over, then turned to Mrs. Patterson and the still unconscious Mr. Godfrey. "Can you ride?" he asked the older woman. She looked at him with wide, fearful eyes. I've never—" Yates nodded, making a decision. "We will go slow. I will get help from Bismarck, but first I need to get you all somewhere safe. My camp has supplies, shelter. It is the closest refuge." He lifted Mrs. Patterson onto the horse first, then positioned Mr. Godfrey in front of her, propping him carefully. "Hold him steady," Yates instructed, and she wrapped her arms around the unconscious man, gripping tight. Then Yates turned to Olivia. "You will ride with me," he said, as if there had never been any other option. He swung up onto the horse behind Mrs. Patterson with an ease that spoke of a lifetime in the saddle, then reached down for Olivia. She grasped his forearm and felt the muscles bunch beneath her fingers as he lifted her up as if she weighed no more than a child. She found herself seated in front of him, his arms coming around her to take the reins, effectively caging her in his embrace. "Hold on," he said, his breath stirring the hair near her ear. They set off at a careful pace, mindful of the injured and frightened passengers. Olivia tried not to think about how aware she was of every point of contact between them, his chest against her back solid and warm, his arms on either side of her, flexing slightly as he guided the horse, his thighs bracketing hers. She had never been this close to a man who was not family, and certainly never to a man like Yates Morrison, who seemed more force of nature than human. The Dakota landscape rolled past them, all golden grass and blue sky, deceptively peaceful after the violence of the attack. Olivia's mind kept replaying the moment the flames had erupted, the suffocating heat, the certainty that she was about to die, and then those hands reaching through the fire for her, refusing to let her go. Thank you," she said quietly, the words inadequate for what he had done but all she had. "You saved my life." "Anyone would have done the same," Yates replied, but she heard the slight tightness in his voice that suggested he did not fully believe that. "The raiders did not," she pointed out. "They could have helped us. Instead, they are animals," Yates said flatly. "Less than animals, and they have been terrorizing this territory for months. The law cannot seem to catch them." "Do you know who they are?" "I have my suspicions. There's a gang led by a man called Cutter Briggs. They operate out of the Badlands, hitting stagecoaches and supply wagons, killing anyone who resists. The descriptions match." His arms tightened fractionally around her, a protective gesture that Olivia suspected was unconscious. She found herself leaning back into his strength, letting him support her weight. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving her exhausted and shaky. "Rest if you need to," Yates said, as if he could sense her weariness. "We have a ways to go yet." "I do not want to be a burden." "You are not." The certainty in his voice left no room for argument. The miles passed slowly. The sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Mrs. Patterson dozed fitfully behind them, still clutching Mr. Godfrey, who had started to stir and moan softly. When they finally reached Yates's camp, Olivia understood immediately why he had chosen this location. The camp was tucked into a narrow canyon, sheltered on three sides by towering rock walls that would provide protection from wind and weather. A small creek ran through the middle, its water clear and cold from mountain snowmelt. Yates had set up a simple but efficient living space, a large tent, a fire pit ringed with stones, supplies stored in waterproof containers and hung from trees to keep them away from animals. It was the home of someone who knew how to survive in harsh country, who needed nothing from civilization and probably preferred it that way. Yates dismounted in one smooth motion and immediately reached up to help Mrs. Patterson down, then carefully lifted Mr. Godfrey and carried him into the tent. Olivia slid off the horse on her own, her legs unsteady after the long ride. She followed Yates into the tent and watched as he laid the salesman on a bedroll, checking his pupils and feeling for broken bones with surprising gentleness. "Concussion," Yates pronounced. "Maybe a cracked rib or two. He needs a doctor, but he will live." Mrs. Patterson sank onto another bedroll, looking like she might collapse at any moment. Yates brought her a canteen of water and a strip of dried meat. "Eat," he said. "Drink. You are safe here." Then he turned to Olivia, those intense eyes sweeping over her once more. "Let me see your shoulder." "It is fine, truly." "Let me see it." There was no arguing with that tone. Olivia carefully moved her arm, wincing at the sharp pain that lanced through her shoulder joint. Yates noticed immediately. He gestured for her to sit, then knelt beside her, his hands moving to the collar of her dress. She stiffened instinctively. "I need to check for dislocation," he explained, his voice patient. "I will not hurt you more than necessary, and Mrs. Patterson is right here." Olivia nodded, feeling foolish for her reaction. He was only trying to help. She forced herself to relax as his fingers probed her shoulder through the fabric, testing the joint, the bones. His touch was professional, methodical, but she still felt heat creep up her neck at the intimacy of it. "Not dislocated," he said after a moment, sitting back. "Badly bruised. You will have limited mobility for a few days, but it will heal." "Thank you," she said again, and this time he met her eyes, something unreadable flickering in his expression. "Stop thanking me," he said quietly. "What kind of man would I be if I had left you to burn?" The question hung in the air between them. Olivia found she could not look away from him. There was something magnetic about Yates Morrison, something that went beyond his obvious physical strength. He carried himself with a quiet confidence that suggested he had faced down danger many times and survived. But there was also a loneliness to him, a sense that he had removed himself from the world of other people for reasons he did not share. The moment broke when Mr. Godfrey groaned and opened his eyes. Yates moved to attend to him, explaining what had happened in calm, measured tones. The salesman was disoriented and in pain, but he was coherent, which was a good sign. Yates gave him water and checked his injuries again, then helped him settle more comfortably. "I will ride to Bismarck at first light," Yates announced. "Bring back a doctor and arrange for transport. It's about a 3-hour ride, so I should return by midday tomorrow." "You would do that for us?" Mrs. Patterson asked, her voice wavering with emotion. "Of course." Yates said it as if there were no other possible response. He went outside to tend to his horse and build up the fire. Olivia followed after a moment, drawn by an impulse she did not fully understand. She found him unsaddling the bay gelding, his movements economical and practiced. In the fading light, he seemed almost mythic, a figure carved from stone and shadow. "Do you live out here alone?" she asked. Yates glanced at her. "Most of the time. I have a cabin about 10 miles north, deeper in the mountains. This is where I stay when I'm hunting or trapping in this area." "That sounds lonely." "It is peaceful," he corrected, though his tone suggested the two might not be mutually exclusive. Olivia wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of the evening chill. Yates noticed immediately. He finished with the horse and went to his supply containers, pulling out a heavy wool blanket that he draped around her shoulders. His hands lingered for just a second, a brief touch that sent warmth flooding through her. "You should rest," he said. "It has been a difficult day." "I do not think I could sleep if I tried. Every time I close my eyes, I see the flames." Understanding crossed his features. "That will pass in time. The mind needs to process what happened. But you survived, Olivia. Hold on to that." The way he said her name, low and rough, did strange things to her heartbeat. She pulled the blanket tighter and watched as he built up the fire, the flames catching and growing, driving back the darkness. Under any other circumstances, fire might have frightened her after what she had been through. But somehow, with Yates nearby, she felt safe even with the dancing flames just feet away. He produced supplies from his stores and began preparing a simple meal, beans and salt pork cooked in a cast-iron pot, along with hard bread softened in the bean broth. It was plain frontier fare, but the smell made Olivia realize how hungry she was. She had not eaten since morning, before the attack. When the food was ready, Yates served everyone, making sure Mrs. Patterson and Mr. Godfrey had full portions before taking any for himself. He ate efficiently, without wasted motion, his attention constantly scanning their surroundings, even as he sat beside the fire. He was watching for threats, Olivia realized. Even here, in his own camp, he remained vigilant. "Were you always a mountain man?" she asked, curious about this enigmatic stranger who had appeared in her life so dramatically. Yates was quiet for a long moment, and she thought he might not answer. Then he said, "I was a soldier once. Army scout during the Indian campaigns. After that ended, I could not go back to towns and cities. Too much noise, too many people. So I came out here. Do you prefer it? Being alone?" His eyes found hers across the fire. "I did. Until today, I would have said it was the only life I wanted." The implication in his words made her breath catch. She looked away, flustered, and caught Mrs. Patterson watching them with keen interest despite her exhaustion. The older woman's expression suggested she saw exactly what was developing between them, and she approved. Night settled over the camp fully. The temperature dropped significantly once the sun disappeared, which Olivia had learned was typical of the high plains in summer. Yates banked the fire and insisted that the three of them sleep in the tent while he kept watch outside. Mrs. Patterson was too tired to argue, and Mr. Godfrey was in no condition to do anything but rest. But Olivia hesitated. "You need sleep too," she said. "You're riding to Bismarck tomorrow." "I have gone longer without sleep," Yates assured her, "and I will rest easier knowing you are safe." There it was again, that intense protectiveness that seemed to encompass her specifically. Olivia wanted to argue, but she could see the determination in his face. Yates Morrison was not a man who changed his mind once it was made up. She reluctantly went into the tent, laying down on the bedroll Yates had indicated was hers. Through the open tent flap, she could see him sitting by the fire, his rifle across his knees, outlined against the flames. He looked like some ancient guardian, tireless and strong. Despite everything that had happened, despite the fear still lurking at the edges of her mind, Olivia felt herself relaxing. As long as Yates was watching over them, nothing would harm them. She drifted into an uneasy sleep filled with fragments of dreams, fire and smoke and those terrible moments when she thought she would die. But every time the dreams grew too frightening, she would surface slightly and hear the crackle of the fire or catch a glimpse of Yates's solid form keeping watch, and the fear would recede. He was there. She was safe. Morning came with the smell of coffee brewing and bacon sizzling. Olivia woke feeling stiff and sore, every muscle protesting as she sat up. Her shoulder throbbed in particular, but it was manageable. She emerged from the tent to find the camp bathed in early golden light, and Yates standing by the fire, cooking breakfast with the same quiet competence he brought to everything. "How do you feel?" he asked without turning around, somehow aware of her presence immediately. "Like I was thrown around the inside of a burning stagecoach," she said, attempting humor. "So better than I probably should." The corner of his mouth quirked in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "Sit, eat. I want to leave soon." He had already saddled his horse. Olivia realized he must have been up for hours preparing for the journey to Bismarck. She accepted the plate of food he handed her and ate quickly, watching as he checked his supplies, his weapons, his gear. Every movement was purposeful, the habits of someone who had survived in dangerous country by being thorough. Before he mounted up, Yates came to stand in front of her. In the morning light, he seemed even larger than he had the day before, his presence overwhelming. He reached out and gently tilted her chin up with his fingers, his touch sending electricity through her skin. "I will be back before you know it," he said. "Stay in camp. Do not wander. There is food and water, and my rifle is in the tent if you need it. Do you know how to shoot?" "My father taught me," Olivia said, surprised by how breathless she sounded. "Good." His thumb brushed across her cheek, such a small gesture but filled with meaning. "Stay safe, Olivia." Then he was gone, swinging onto his horse and riding out of the canyon at a ground-eating lope that would carry him swiftly to Bismarck. Olivia stood watching until he disappeared from sight, feeling strangely bereft without his presence. The morning passed slowly. Mrs. Patterson recovered some of her spirits and proved to be a chatty companion, talking about her children back east and her plans to visit her daughter who had married a rancher near Bismarck. Mr. Godfrey remained quiet, clearly in pain but trying to bear it stoically. Olivia tended the fire and explored the immediate area around camp, careful not to go far as Yates had instructed. She found herself thinking about him constantly, the way he had pulled her from the flames without hesitation, how he had held her afterward, as if she were something precious, the intensity in his eyes when he looked at her. She barely knew him, had met him only yesterday under the worst possible circumstances, but something had sparked between them. Something undeniable. It was afternoon when she heard horses approaching. Fear spiked through her until she recognized the bay gelding, and then relief flooded her system. Yates had returned, and he was not alone. A man who introduced himself as Dr. Matthias rode with him, along with a wagon driven by a serious-looking woman named Clara, who apparently ran the boarding house in Bismarck. They had brought medical supplies, fresh food, and proper transportation. Dr. Matthias immediately set to work examining Mr. Godfrey and Mrs. Patterson, confirming Yates's diagnoses and praising his field treatment. Clara busied herself organizing the wagon and making tea, mothering everyone with brisk efficiency. But Olivia only had eyes for Yates, who had gone to tend his horse and was studiously not looking at her. When she approached him, he finally met her gaze, and the intensity there nearly stopped her heart. "Everything went well?" she asked, needing to say something to break the tension. "The marshal wants statements from all of you about the attack," Yates said. "He also wants me to guide him and some men back to where it happened, see if we can pick up the raiders' trail." "That sounds dangerous." "It is what needs to be done." Olivia wanted to grab his arm, to tell him not to go, but she had no right. She had known this man for barely a day. What claim could she possibly have on him? And yet the thought of him riding after dangerous outlaws made her stomach clench with worry. "Be careful," she said instead, the words completely inadequate. Something softened in Yates's expression. He stepped closer, and his hand came up to cup the side of her face, his palm warm and rough against her skin. "I will come back," he said, as if promising her something sacred. "I swear it." Before she could respond, he turned away to speak with Dr. Matthias. The moment was broken, but the feeling lingered, warm and electric in her chest. They loaded everyone into the wagon for the journey to Bismarck. Yates rode alongside, silent and watchful. Olivia found herself stealing glances at him throughout the trip, and more than once caught him looking back at her with an expression she could not quite read, but that made her pulse quicken. Bismarck proved to be a bustling frontier town, larger than Olivia had expected. Clara's boarding house stood on the main street, a solid 2-story building with fresh paint and curtains in the windows. The proprietress showed them to clean, comfortable rooms and promised hot baths and proper meals. After the trauma of the past day, it felt almost surreal to be back in civilization. Olivia bathed and changed into the spare dress Clara had kindly lent her, since her own had been ruined in the fire. When she came downstairs, she found Yates waiting in the front parlor, hat in hand, looking distinctly uncomfortable in the domestic setting. He had cleaned up as well, his hair tied back, his beard neatly trimmed, wearing a clean shirt that did nothing to hide the massive breadth of his shoulders. "The marshal wants to see you," he said. "I will take you to his office." They walked through the streets of Bismarck together, not touching but acutely aware of each other. People stared at Yates as they passed, some with recognition, others with wariness. He seemed oblivious to the attention, his focus entirely on Olivia, one hand hovering near the small of her back as if ready to steady her at any moment. Marshal Thomas Gentry was a weathered man in his 50s with sharp eyes that missed nothing. He listened to Olivia's account of the attack with careful attention, asking clarifying questions and taking notes. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and shook his head. "Cutter Briggs and his gang," he confirmed. "This is the 4th stagecoach they have hit in as many months. But setting it on fire, that is new. They are getting bolder." "Or more desperate," Yates said from where he stood by the window. "Either way, they need to be stopped." The marshal turned to Yates. "I am putting together a posse. 6 good men. We ride at dawn tomorrow. You in?" Yates hesitated, his eyes cutting to Olivia for just a second. Then he nodded. "I am in." The marshal asked a few more questions, then dismissed them both. Back outside, Olivia finally voiced the fear that had been building in her chest since she learned of Yates's plan. "This is because of us, is it not? Because of what they did to the stagecoach?" "This is because they are outlaws who have killed innocent people," Yates said firmly. "They would have been hunted down eventually. Today just moves up the timeline. But you are doing it now because—" She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Yates stopped walking and turned to face her fully. They were on a quiet side street, away from the bustle of the main thoroughfare. He took her hand, his fingers engulfing hers, and the simple touch sent warmth spreading up her arm. "I am doing it now because when I pulled you from those flames, when I held you and felt you trembling against me, something changed," he said, his voice low and rough with emotion. "I have spent years alone by choice, convinced I was better off without connections to other people. And then you appeared in my life. And suddenly everything I thought I knew about what I wanted makes no sense anymore." Olivia's breath caught. "Yates." "I barely know you," he continued, as if he needed to get the words out before he lost his nerve. "We met yesterday, but I cannot stop thinking about you, about how you felt in my arms, about how brave you were, even when you were terrified, about the way you look at me, like I am something more than just the hermit who lives in the mountains." "You are so much more than that," Olivia said, her voice barely a whisper. "You are the man who saved my life, who protected us without asking anything in return, who made me feel safer than I have ever felt, even in the middle of the wilderness." His free hand came up to cradle her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone with heartbreaking gentleness. "I need to ride with the posse tomorrow. I need to make sure those men cannot hurt anyone else, but when I come back—" "When you come back," she prompted, her heart racing. "When I come back, I would like permission to court you properly," Yates said, and despite the formal words, his eyes burned with barely restrained intensity. "If you are willing, if I am not being too forward." Joy bubbled up in Olivia's chest, bright and overwhelming. "You are not being too forward," she assured him, "and yes, I would very much like that." For a moment she thought he might kiss her right there in the street. He leaned closer, his intent clear in his eyes, but then seemed to remember where they were and pulled back with visible effort. His hand slipped from her face, though he did not release her other hand. "I should take you back to the boarding house," he said, his voice rougher than before I forget myself entirely." They walked back through the streets, hands still linked, and Olivia felt like she was floating. The trauma of the stagecoach attack had not disappeared, and she knew she would carry those scars for a long time. But somehow, improbably, something beautiful had emerged from that horror. She had found Yates Morrison, and he had found her, and the connection between them felt as real and solid as the mountain stone he called home. At the boarding house, Yates finally released her hand, though he seemed reluctant to do so. "Get some rest," he said. "I will see you before we ride out tomorrow." "Promise you will be careful," Olivia said, unable to keep the worry from her voice. "I promise." He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her temple. "I have something to come back to now. That changes everything." She watched him walk away, his long strides carrying him quickly down the street, and pressed a hand to her chest where her heart was beating wildly. 24 hours ago, she had been a woman alone, traveling to start a new life in an unfamiliar place. Now, everything had changed, tilted on its axis, and she could not imagine going back to who she had been before a mountain man with storm-colored eyes had pulled her from the flames and held her like she was the most important thing in the world. That evening, Olivia met with her uncle, Samuel Hartwell, who had been notified of her arrival and the circumstances surrounding it. He was a kindly man in his early 50s, unmarried and devoted to his business. He welcomed her warmly and assured her that the position in his mercantile was still available whenever she felt ready to begin working. "Though, if you need time to recover from your ordeal, you need only say so," he added, concern evident in his expression. "What you went through would shake anyone." Olivia thanked him, but said she would prefer to stay busy. Work would give her something to focus on besides worrying about Yates riding after dangerous outlaws. Her uncle seemed pleased by her determination and made arrangements for her to start in 2 days' time, giving her tomorrow to settle in properly. That night, Olivia lay in the boarding house bed, comfortable and safe, but sleep eluded her. She kept thinking about Yates out at his camp, preparing for tomorrow's hunt. She thought about how it had felt to be held in his arms, surrounded by his strength. She thought about the way he had looked at her when he asked permission to court her, like she was a wonder he could not quite believe was real. She had never felt this way about anyone before. There had been beaux back in St. Louis, proper young men from good families, but none of them had stirred anything in her heart. Her parents had died of influenza 2 years ago, leaving her with little money and few prospects, which was why she had accepted her uncle's offer to come west. She had expected to start a new chapter of her life in Bismarck, but she had not expected to fall in love. Was it too soon to call it love? They barely knew each other, but Olivia could not deny the depth of feeling that had taken root in her chest. When Yates looked at her, she felt seen, truly seen, in a way she never had before, and she knew with bone-deep certainty that he felt the same. She just had to trust that he would come back to her safely. Dawn came too quickly. Olivia dressed and hurried downstairs, desperate to see Yates before he left. She found him on the street outside the boarding house, standing beside his saddled horse, clearly waiting for her. Relief and something warmer flooded through her at the sight of him. "I hoped you would come," he said as she approached. "I could not let you leave without saying goodbye," Olivia replied. They stood facing each other, the morning air cool around them, the town slowly waking to a new day. Yates reached out and took both her hands in his grip warm and strong. "I will be back in 3 days, maybe 4, he said. "The trail might take us far, but I will return, Olivia, I swear it." "I believe you," she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. He lifted one of her hands to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, the gesture courtly and sweet, but his eyes dark with barely controlled emotion. "Wait for me," he said. "Always," she promised. Yates mounted his horse in one fluid motion, gave her one last intense look, and then rode off to join the marshal and the rest of the posse gathering at the edge of town. Olivia watched until they disappeared into the distance, her hands still tingling where he had kissed them, her heart full of hope and fear in equal measure. The next 3 days passed with agonizing slowness. Olivia threw herself into learning her duties at her uncle's mercantile, grateful for the distraction. Samuel's store was well stocked and popular with both townspeople and the surrounding homesteaders. Olivia helped with inventory, waited on customers, and kept the account books, discovering that she had a knack for the work. But no matter how busy she kept herself, part of her attention was always on the horizon, watching for Yates's return. Miss Patterson and Mr. Godfrey had both recovered enough to continue their journeys, though the older woman made Olivia promise to write and tell her how things developed with that handsome mountain man who looks at you like you hung the moon. Olivia had blushed furiously, but promised. On the evening of the fourth day, just as Olivia was helping her uncle close up the store, a shout went up from the street. "The posse is back!" Her heart leaped into her throat. She dropped the crate she had been carrying and ran outside, not caring that it was improper, not caring about anything except seeing for herself that Yates had returned safely. The riders came down the main street in the fading light, weary and dust-covered but alive. Olivia's eyes scanned them frantically until she found him, and the relief that crashed over her was so intense it made her dizzy. Yates sat tall in his saddle, his face shadowed with exhaustion, but whole and unhurt. Their eyes met across the distance, and despite the crowd gathering around the posse, despite the marshal beginning to give some kind of report, Yates only had attention for her. He dismounted and handed his reins to someone else without looking, his strides eating up the ground between them. Olivia met him halfway, propriety be damned. She threw her arms around his neck, and his wrapped around her waist, lifting her clean off her feet as he held her tight against his chest. He smelled of horse and sweat and gunpowder, and she had never experienced anything so wonderful in her life. "You came back," she whispered against his shoulder. "I promised," he said, his voice rough with emotion and fatigue. "Did you doubt me?" "Not for a second." He set her back on her feet but did not let go, and Olivia did not care that half the town was probably watching them. Let them look. This man had saved her life, had protected her, had looked at her like she was precious, and she was not ashamed of her feelings for him. "Did you catch them?" she asked. "The raiders?" "We caught them," Yates confirmed, satisfaction evident in his tone. "Cutter Briggs and his whole gang, they will face justice for what they did." "Thank God," Olivia breathed. Yates's hand came up to cradle the back of her head, his fingers threading through her hair. "I thought about you every moment I was gone," he said quietly, just for her. "Thought about getting back to you. It was all that kept me going when the trail got hard." "I thought about you too," she admitted. "I was so worried." "I know. I could feel it." He smiled, a real smile that transformed his face, making him look younger and less careworn. "But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." The marshal called out to Yates, needing him for something, and he reluctantly released Olivia with a promise to see her later. She watched him go, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. Around her, she heard whispers and speculation, people discussing the relationship between the reclusive mountain man and the newcomer to town. But she did not care. Let them talk. She knew what she felt, and more importantly, she knew what Yates felt. That evening, after Yates had dealt with his official duties and seen to his horse, he came to the boarding house. Clara let him in with a knowing smile and pointed him toward the parlor where Olivia sat trying and failing to focus on a book. When he appeared in the doorway, still wearing his trail-worn buckskins, his hair loose around his shoulders, her breath caught. "Walk with me," he asked, extending his hand. She took it without hesitation. They walked through the streets of Bismarck as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. Yates led her to the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open prairie, and they could see the mountains rising in the distance, dark and majestic against the colorful sky. "I have been thinking," Yates said, breaking the comfortable silence between them, "about what I want, about what kind of life I want to live." Olivia's heart began to pound, but she stayed quiet, letting him find his words. "I told you I spent years alone because I thought that was what I needed," he continued. "The war, the violence I saw, it changed me, made me hard. I did not think I could be around people anymore without that darkness tainting everything." He turned to look at her, and his eyes were full of vulnerability that she suspected few people ever saw. "But then I met you. And when I held you in my arms after pulling you from that fire, I felt something I had not felt in years, hope. The possibility that maybe I could have more than just survival, that maybe I could have a life worth living. Yates, Olivia whispered, tears pricking her eyes. He took both her hands, holding them gently despite the strength she knew he possessed. I know it has only been a few days. I know by all reasonable standards this is too fast. But I also know what I feel. And I know that I want to spend every day learning more about you, making you smile, keeping you safe, if you will have me. If I will have you? Olivia laughed, the sound watery with emotion. Yates Morrison, you are the most extraordinary man I have ever met. Strong and capable and brave, but also gentle and protective and thoughtful. You make me feel things I did not know I was capable of feeling. So yes, I will have you, in whatever way you are offering. The smile that spread across his face was like the sun breaking through clouds. He pulled her closer, his hands sliding up her arms to her shoulders, then to cradle her face with infinite care. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his voice low and rough. "Please," she breathed. He lowered his head slowly, giving her every opportunity to change her mind, but Olivia only rose on her toes to meet him. Their lips touched softly at first, a gentle exploration, but the kiss quickly deepened as the passion they had both been restraining finally found release. Yates kissed her like she was air and he was drowning, like she was the answer to every question he had never known to ask. His arms came around her, pulling her flush against his body, and Olivia melted into his strength, into his warmth, into the rightness of being exactly where she was meant to be. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said, the words simple but weighted with absolute truth. "I know it is too soon to say it, but I do. I love you, Olivia Hartwell." Joy exploded in her chest, bright and overwhelming. "I love you too," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "I love you so much it terrifies me." "Do not be terrified," Yates said, his thumb wiping away her tears. "I will never let anything hurt you. I swear it on my life." They kissed again, slower this time but no less passionate, and when they finally made their way back to the boarding house hand in hand, Olivia knew that her life had been forever changed by a burning stagecoach and a mountain man who had pulled her from the flames. The courtship that followed was unconventional by any standard, but it fit them perfectly. Yates could not stay in town for long periods. The crowds and noise set him on edge after too many days. But he visited as often as he could, and Olivia found excuses to ride out to his mountain cabin whenever her uncle could spare her from the store. The first time she saw his home, she fell in love with it almost as much as she had fallen in love with the man himself. The cabin stood in a sheltered valley, surrounded by towering pines and mountain peaks. It was small but beautifully constructed, with a stone fireplace and windows that let in the light. Yates had built it with his own hands, and the care he had taken was evident in every detail. "It is not much," he said, watching her explore with anxious eyes. "Nothing like what you are probably used to." "It is perfect," Olivia interrupted, turning to face him. "It is so perfectly you, strong and sturdy and built to last." The relief on his face was palpable. He showed her around the property, the stable where he kept his horse and pack mules, the smokehouse where he preserved meat, the garden where he grew vegetables. He was completely self-sufficient, needing almost nothing from the outside world. "Would you really give this up?" Olivia asked later as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. "To be with me? To live in town?" Yates was quiet for a long moment, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest. "I would live anywhere if it meant being with you," he said finally. "But I am hoping we might find a compromise." "What kind of compromise?" "Spend part of the year here, part in town. You could keep working for your uncle during the busy seasons, help him with the store, and when business is slower we could come up here. The best of both worlds." Olivia turned to look up at him, seeing the hope in his eyes, the willingness to bend his solitary life to make room for her. "That sounds perfect," she said, and kissed him to seal the promise. The weeks turned into months. Summer gave way to autumn, and the mountains transformed into a riot of gold and red and orange. Yates continued to trap and hunt, selling his furs in Bismarck and slowly becoming more comfortable spending time in town. The locals grew accustomed to seeing the mountain man walking through the streets with Olivia on his arm, and what had started as gossip and speculation turned into acceptance and even affection. Yates had saved their lives, after all, and anyone could see how devoted he was to Samuel Hartwell's niece. On a crisp October evening, with the first snow beginning to dust the mountain peaks, Yates took Olivia back to the place where they had first met. The burned remains of the stagecoach were long gone, cleared away months before, but they both knew the spot. Yates helped her down from the horse they rode together now, comfortable with the shared intimacy, and led her to where a cluster of wildflowers grew despite the approaching winter. "This is where my life truly began," Yates said, looking around the desolate landscape that had witnessed such violence and such transformation. "The moment I heard your scream, something in me woke up, something I thought had died years ago." "Your heart," Olivia said softly. "My heart," he agreed. He turned to face her fully, and his expression was solemn. "Olivia Hartwell, I have loved you from the moment I pulled you from those flames. Every day since has only made that love stronger. You have given me a reason to live instead of just survive. You have brought light into my darkness and laughter into my silence, and I cannot imagine spending another day without you by my side." He dropped to one knee, pulling a small box from his pocket. Olivia's hands flew to her mouth, tears already streaming down her face. "Will you marry me?" Yates asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Will you be my wife, and let me spend the rest of my life showing you how much you mean to me?" "Yes," Olivia sobbed, dropping to her knees in front of him and throwing her arms around his neck. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times, yes!" Yates caught her against him, holding her tight, his own eyes suspiciously bright. He pulled back just enough to slip the ring onto her finger. It was a simple gold band with a small but perfect diamond, and it fit like it had been made for her. They kissed there on the Dakota plains where their story had begun, with the wind whipping around them and the first snowflakes beginning to fall. It was not romantic by conventional standards, but for them it was perfect. They had been forged in fire and fear, and their love had emerged stronger for it. The wedding took place in December in the small church in Bismarck. The whole town turned out for the event, curious to see the mountain man take a bride. Samuel Hartwell walked Olivia down the aisle, beaming with pride, and when she reached the front of the church and saw Yates waiting for her, his hair neatly trimmed and braided, wearing a new suit that could not hide his powerful build, her heart nearly burst with happiness. He looked at her like she was the only person in the world, like she was the answer to every prayer he had ever whispered. And when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, and Yates kissed her with a passion that made several of the older ladies fan themselves, Olivia knew she had found her home. They spent their wedding night in the cabin in the mountains, snow falling softly outside while a fire crackled in the hearth. Yates carried her over the threshold, refusing to put her down even when she laughingly protested that she could walk. "You are my wife now," he said, setting her carefully on her feet in front of the fire. "Let me take care of you." And he did, with a tenderness and passion that stole her breath and made her understand for the first time what it meant to be truly cherished. They came together in the firelight, learning each other, loving each other, and Olivia felt complete in a way she had never imagined possible. In the years that followed, they built a life that honored both their needs. They split their time between the mountain cabin and a small house Yates built on the edge of Bismarck, close enough to town for Olivia to help her uncle, but far enough for Yates to have the space he craved. Olivia continued to work at the mercantile, her business sense proving invaluable, and Yates supplemented their income with his trapping and occasional work as a guide for the army and survey parties. Their first child, a son they named James, was born in the autumn of 1880, delivered by the doctor in Bismarck, with Yates holding Olivia's hand through every moment of labor, refusing to leave her side despite the doctor's protests that it was unseemly. When James was placed in his arms, the fierce mountain man cried unashamedly, overwhelmed by the tiny life they had created together. 2 years later, a daughter followed, whom they named Rose. She had her mother's delicate features and her father's stormy eyes, and she had Yates wrapped around her tiny finger from the moment she drew breath. Watching him with their children, so gentle despite his size and strength, made Olivia fall in love with him all over again every single day. Samuel Hartwell eventually made Olivia a partner in the mercantile, recognizing her skill and dedication. The business thrived under their combined management, becoming one of the most successful stores in the territory. When North Dakota achieved statehood in 1889, they celebrated with the whole town, their children running wild with the other youngsters, while Yates held Olivia close and marveled at how much their lives had changed. The nightmares about the burning stagecoach faded with time, though they never disappeared completely. But whenever Olivia woke gasping from dreams of flames and smoke, Yates was there, holding her tight, whispering reassurances until her heartbeat calmed and she remembered she was safe. He was her protector, her partner, her greatest love. As the years passed and their children grew, Olivia sometimes thought back to that terrifying day when raiders had set the stagecoach ablaze. She thought about how close she had come to dying in those flames, how her life could have ended before it truly began. But then strong arms would come around her from behind, and Yates would press a kiss to her temple, and she would be grateful beyond measure for the twist of fate that had brought them together. Their son James grew tall and strong like his father, though he showed more interest in books and learning than in mountain living. They sent him to school in the East when he turned 18, proud of the young man he had become. Rose proved to be as fierce as her mother and as capable as her father, learning to ride and shoot and trap alongside her parents, showing no interest in the conventional expectations for young ladies. In 1895, on the anniversary of the day they met, Yates surprised Olivia with a trip back to the place where the stagecoach had burned. They rode together as they always had, comfortable with years of practice, and dismounted at the spot that had changed both their lives forever. 16 years, Yates said, looking around the landscape that had barely changed despite the passage of time. 16 years since I pulled you from the flames. The best 16 years of my life, Olivia said, leaning into his side. He wrapped his arm around her, solid and strong as ever, though his beard now showed threads of silver and his face bore more lines from years of sun and weather. I never thought I would have this, he said quietly. A wife I love beyond reason. Children who bring me joy every day. A life that means something beyond just survival. I never thought I would find someone who understood me the way you do, Olivia replied. Someone who made me feel safe and cherished and seen. Yates turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his just as he had that first evening when he confessed his love. If I had to go back and do it all again, I would not change a single moment. Every hardship, every lonely year led me to you, and you are worth everything. Olivia rose on her toes to kiss him, this man who had saved her life and given her a future she could never have imagined. I love you, Yates Morrison, today and every day for the rest of our lives. And I love you, Olivia Morrison, my flame-haired girl who I pulled from the fire. They stood together in that desolate place that had witnessed the beginning of their love story, holding each other as the sun set over the Dakota Badlands, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The years had been kind to them, and more years stretched ahead, full of promise and possibility. That evening, they returned to their cabin in the mountains, the place that had become their sanctuary. Rose was staying with friends in town, giving them the rare gift of privacy. They sat together on the porch as stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, wrapped in a shared blanket against the cool mountain air. Do you ever regret leaving civilization? Olivia asked, a question she had asked many times over the years, but always wanted to hear his answer. Never, Yates said firmly. You brought all the civilization I need right here. Everything that matters is in these mountains with you. Even when the children were loud and demanding and drove you to distraction? He laughed, the sound warm and rich. Even then, especially then, those were the moments I never thought I would have. Olivia snuggled closer to his warmth, marveling as she always did at how safe she felt in his presence. The mountain man who had pulled her from the flames had become her husband, her partner, the father of her children, and the keeper of her heart. Their love had been forged in fire and fear, but it had grown into something beautiful and enduring, as constant as the mountains themselves. Years continued to pass in contentment. James finished his schooling and surprised them both by returning to North Dakota with a bride of his own, a practical young woman named Catherine who shared his love of books and education. They opened a school in Bismarck, and Olivia could not have been prouder of her son's choice to serve his community. Rose eventually married a rancher named Daniel Foster, a good man who respected her fierce independence and matched her strength of spirit. They settled on a spread north of Bismarck, and Rose proved to be an excellent rancher, running cattle and horses with skill that impressed even the most skeptical old-timers. Grandchildren followed, first from James and Catherine, then from Rose and Daniel. Yates proved to be as devoted a grandfather as he had been a father, teaching his grandchildren to track and hunt and respect the land, while Olivia taught them to read and do figures and treat others with kindness. Their mountain cabin became a gathering place for the growing family, filled with laughter and love and the continuation of the legacy they had built together. Samuel Hartwell passed peacefully in his sleep in 1898, and Olivia mourned the uncle who had given her a chance at a new life in Dakota Territory. They buried him in the Bismarck Cemetery, and Yates held her as she wept, providing the comfort and strength he had always given so freely. Olivia took over full ownership of the mercantile, running it with the same combination of shrewdness and fairness that her uncle had taught her. The store continued to thrive, becoming a cornerstone of the Bismarck community. Young people came to work for her, learning business skills that would serve them throughout their lives, and she took pride in helping shape the next generation. As the new century dawned, Yates and Olivia stood together on the porch of their mountain cabin, watching the sun rise over the peaks they had called home for more than 20 years. They were older now, silver threading through both their heads of hair, their bodies showing the wear of decades of hard living. But the love between them had only grown stronger with time, deepened by shared experiences and weathered challenges. 21 years, Yates said, echoing that conversation from years before. 21 years since I pulled you from the flames. The best 21 years imaginable, Olivia agreed, leaning into his solid warmth as she always had, and hopefully many more to come. As many as the good Lord grants us, Yates said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head, and I will treasure every single one. Their children and grandchildren visited regularly, filling the cabin with noise and life. James brought his family up every summer, and his children ran wild through the mountains just as he once had, though he himself preferred to sit on the porch with books and good conversation. Rose's visits were less frequent but no less cherished, and her children showed the same fierce independence and capability as their mother. In the summer of 1902, the whole family gathered at the mountain cabin to celebrate Yates and Olivia's 22nd wedding anniversary. It was a boisterous affair, with children running everywhere, food and laughter in abundance, and stories being shared around the fire pit as the sun went down. Yates sat in his chair with Olivia beside him, watching their legacy play out before them, and his heart was full to bursting. "Look what we made," Olivia whispered to him as their youngest grandson climbed into Yates' lap, demanding a story about the old days. "Look what you made," Yates corrected gently. "You took a broken man and gave him a reason to be whole again. Everything good in my life comes from you." "We healed each other," Olivia said, which was closer to the truth. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, they sat together under the stars as they had so many times before. Yates held Olivia's hand, his thumb tracing patterns on her skin, and thought about the impossible journey that had brought them to this moment. A burning stagecoach, a woman trapped in flames, a mountain man who had pulled her free and held her tight, and from that violent, terrifying beginning had grown a love that had sustained them through more than 2 decades, a love that had created a family and a legacy that would outlive them both. "Thank you," he said quietly. Olivia looked up at him, questions in her eyes. For what? For seeing past the rough exterior to the man beneath, for taking a chance on someone who had given up on having anything more than survival, for loving me when I did not think I deserved to be loved, for giving me a life worth living. Tears glimmered in her eyes as she reached up to cup his bearded cheek. "You deserve all of that and more," she said firmly. "You are the best man I have ever known, Yates Morrison. Strong and brave and gentle and true. And I have loved you from the moment you pulled me from those flames and refused to let go. I will never let go," he promised, as he had promised so many times before. "Not in this life or the next." They kissed under the star-filled Dakota sky, surrounded by the mountains that had witnessed their love story, and Olivia knew with absolute certainty that she had found her forever home in the arms of the mountain man who had saved her life and captured her heart. The years that followed were peaceful and full. Yates and Olivia grew old together with grace and gratitude, their love never diminishing even as their bodies aged and slowed. They watched their grandchildren grow into fine young men and women and eventually welcomed great-grandchildren into their extended family. Yates remained strong well into his 70s, still capable of chopping wood and hunting game, though he moved a bit slower and needed Olivia's help with things that once would have been easy. She teased him gently about getting old, even as she dealt with her own aches and pains, and he always responded by pulling her into his arms and reminding her that she was just as beautiful to him at 70 as she had been at 23. In the spring of 1915, they celebrated their 35th wedding anniversary, surrounded by 4 generations of family. The mountain cabin could barely contain everyone, but they made it work, bodies pressed close, laughter and love filling every corner. Yates stood to make a speech, his voice still strong despite his age, and he looked around at all the faces that represented their legacy. Frank. 35 years ago, I married the most extraordinary woman I have ever known, he began. She took a man who thought he was finished, who had resigned himself to a solitary life without love or connection, and she showed him that there was still joy to be found in the world. She gave me children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She gave me laughter and purpose and a reason to wake up every morning grateful to be alive. He turned to look at Olivia, and his eyes were as intense as they had been the day they met. Every good thing in my life comes from you, my love, and I thank God every day for that burning stagecoach that brought you into my life. There was not a dry eye in the cabin when he finished, and Olivia rose to embrace him, holding him tight as she had held him thousands of times before. You saved my life, she whispered against his chest, and then you made that life worth living. I love you, Yates Morrison, today and always. And I love you. Olivia Morrison, my flame-haired girl, my wife, my everything. They spent that summer in the mountains, moving slowly but still enjoying the beauty of the land they had called home for so long. Yates took Olivia on gentle rides through the forests, showing her places they had not visited in years, revisiting the geography of their shared history. They talked about everything and nothing, comfortable with decades of companionship, and Olivia treasured every moment, knowing that time was growing short. In the autumn, as the leaves turned gold and the air grew crisp, they sat together on the porch, as they had done countless times before. Yates had his arm around Olivia, and she leaned against his side, perfectly content. They watched the sunset over the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red and purple, and Olivia thought about how blessed she had been. A burning stagecoach could have been the end of her story. Instead, it had been the beginning of the greatest love she could have imagined. The mountain man with storm-colored eyes had pulled her from the flames and held her tight, and in doing so had given her a lifetime of love and happiness. No regrets? Yates asked softly, as if reading her thoughts. Not a single one, Olivia assured him, lifting her face for his kiss. You are my greatest adventure, Yates Morrison, and I would do it all again in a heartbeat. As would I, my love. As would I. They sat together as darkness fell, surrounded by the mountains and the memories of a life well lived, secure in the knowledge that their love had created something beautiful and lasting. From the ashes of that terrible day in 1879 had grown a love story for the ages, a testament to the power of courage and connection and the human capacity for healing. The mountain man had saved the woman from the flames, and in return, she had saved him from the lonely darkness that had threatened to consume him. Together, they had built a life of love and laughter, of children and grandchildren, of purpose and joy. And when their time finally came to leave this world, they would go together as they had lived, wrapped in each other's arms and grateful beyond measure for the gift they had been given. Their story would be told by their descendants for generations to come, passed down as family legend. The tale of the raiders who set the stagecoach ablaze, and the mountain man who pulled her from the flames and held her tight, and the love that grew from that moment of terror into something beautiful and eternal. It was a story of the Wild West, of survival and strength, but more than that, it was a story of love conquering all, of two souls finding each other against impossible odds and holding on with everything they had. And in the end, that was all that truly mattered. Not the hardships they had faced or the challenges they had overcome, but the love they had shared and the legacy they had built together. Yates Morrison and Olivia Hartwell Morrison, mountain man and mercantile owner, husband and wife, partners in all things. Their love had burned as bright as the flames that had brought them together, and it had warmed them through every season of their long and happy lives. The mountain stood eternal witness to their story, solid and unchanging as the years turned to decades and the decades to a century. The cabin remained, maintained by their descendants who understood the importance of preserving this piece of family history. And visitors who came to the place where the stagecoach had burned all those years ago sometimes reported feeling a presence, a warmth that had nothing to do with the Dakota sun. Perhaps it was the lingering echo of a love so strong it had imprinted itself on the very land. Or perhaps it was simply the wind playing tricks as it whistled through the grass. But those who knew the story, who had heard it passed down through the generations, understood the truth. Love like that never truly disappeared. It lived on in the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried the blood of Yates and Olivia Morrison in their veins. It lived on in the values they had taught and the example they had set. It lived on in the mountains and the prairies of North Dakota, in the very soil and stone and sky. The raiders had set the stagecoach ablaze, intending only destruction and death. But from those flames had emerged a love story that would endure long after the last ember had cooled, long after the last raider had faced justice, long after the Wild West had faded into history. Because true love, the kind that Yates and Olivia had found in each other, was stronger than fire, stronger than fear, stronger even than time itself. And that love burned bright and eternal, warming all who came after with its radiant glow, a beacon of hope and proof that even in the darkest moments, even when surrounded by flames with death seeming certain, salvation could arrive in the form of strong arms and an unbreakable will, pulling you from the fire and holding you tight, refusing to let go, now and forever. That was the legacy of Yates and Olivia Morrison, mountain man and the woman he saved, husband and wife, two hearts that beat as one from that fateful day in 1879 until their final breath and beyond into eternity where their love continued, undimmed and eternal, as lasting as the mountains themselves.